Can you hear me? I do a last minute test. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Dear distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call to order this meeting. Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to a formal virtual session of a third meeting of a subsidiary body on implementation. Today is the second day of our second block of plenaries. Yesterday, we opened agenda item 5 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but we did not finish our consideration of this item. At the end of the session, I indicated that I would give some time for major groups and observers to make some remarks. Given this, during our session today, we will first complete our consideration of agenda item 5, and then we will consider the first reading of following agenda items. Agenda item 12 on specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol. Agenda item 13 on global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol. Agenda item 10 on review of effectiveness of the processes under the Convention and its protocols. Following this, we will begin our consideration of CRPs on agenda item 3, CRP 2 on review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. Agenda item 4, CRP 1 on assessment and review of effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, and agenda item 9, CRP 5 on mechanism for reporting assessments and review of implementation. I would like to remind you that if technical issues arise, please use the green question mark in the bottom right corner on the meeting homepage to request technical assistance. Colleagues, I would also like to remind you that we are in a very tight schedule and that our time together is limited. Before we begin, I would like to invite the Secretariat to provide some information on the organizational work for these sessions, followed by some logistical information on the use of our online meeting system. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. As you already know, to join all plenary sessions, you must connect through the SBI homepage on the CBD website. From the calendar, click Join the meeting, select the session you wish to attend, followed by the type of connection you need for the session, whether it is speaker or viewer. We ask you not to save the interactive link into your browser, as plenaries and contact groups are different meetings, but instead to join the meeting from the SBI homepage. As you have been informed through the scenario note, plenary sessions will be recorded and streamed online. Statements submitted in writing will be posted online unless the Secretariat is informed otherwise. Delegates are asked to use the online application to upload statements. Please do so prior to delivery in plenary. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters. If you can upload your statements in advance, if you cannot upload your statements in advance, you can also use statements@cbd.int. However, they will be posted on the website only after delivery. In any case, statements, as well as any associated recommendations for text changes, must be posted within 12 hours of the closure of an agenda item if they are to be considered in the future work of the body on that item. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. All plenary sessions will last 3 hours per day and will be held from 7 to 10 a.m. Montreal time, with a 15-minute break approximately midway. Please note that plenary sessions will become active for you to connect 90 minutes before start time, and the Secretariat will provide technical training and testing 60 minutes before the start. Requests for the floor by parties will be heard for each agenda item. Statements by other governments, stakeholder groups, or other observers will also be heard as time allows. Statements on each agenda will be limited to 5 minutes for regions and 3 minutes for individual parties. For major groups, each statement is limited to 4 minutes and other observers to 2 minutes as time allows. Please remember that as you speak, your interventions in plenary are being translated into 5 other official UN languages by a dedicated team of interpreters. In order to facilitate their challenging work and make sure that we can all understand each other, please keep the following in mind. Keep background noise to a minimum. You can do this by wearing noise-canceling headsets and microphone sets. Please mute your electronic devices and notifications. Check your sound using your own voice before joining the session. Upload your statements before delivery rather than after. If any speaker encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. Regarding the use of the online system, when the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the chair. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone and the status bar will turn red on your computer. Please wait a few seconds after the status bar turns red and then start speaking. In the event that the chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so that the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone, turning the status bar to red and enabling you to speak. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication mainly regarding any need for technical support and therefore to keep your remarks there short. The time for statements is limited. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you to manage your time, but please do not speed up your reading as it will be challenging for interpreters to follow you. Please note that towards the mid-session, the chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need to log off during this time. Finally, we remind you that a virtual display table is at your disposal to share publications, information materials, and events that relate to the issues being addressed by SBI-24 and SBI-3. Please click on the tab Virtual Display Table located on the right-hand side of the web portal of the Substa and SBI meetings. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I will now open the floor to concluded statements on Agenda Item 5 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Yesterday, we heard interventions from regional groups and parties, and we had begun to hear intervention by representatives of a major group of stakeholders. But before I opening the floor for interventions by representatives of major stakeholder groups, I see that Costa Rica is asking for the floor as well. So, okay. First, I would like to remind you to focus your interventions on issues related to the development of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which have not yet been addressed through other agenda items, as well as on cross-cutting issues related to gender plan of action, the communication plan for the post-2020 period, proposals for date, venue, and periodicity of upcoming meetings, and the implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. So, but before I continue with statements from major stakeholder groups, I will first give the floor to one more party, Costa Rica. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Costa Rica welcomes the outcomes of the second consultation workshop of biodiversity-related conventions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, especially Conclusion 1, which states that it is essential that the biodiversity-related objectives of all relevant SMEAs are integrated into the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework so that all relevant means can recognize their place and role in its future implementation. And also Conclusion 2, that highlights the importance of using relevant indicators that are already being used by other conventions and processes, including the SDGs, when developing the post-2020 monitoring framework. This will avoid duplication and promote synergies, in particular as data has already been gathered. Costa Rica supports this conclusion and expects that post-2020 takes them into account because they represent an accurate way to achieve a better outcome at national level. On the other hand, Madam Chair, regarding the document CBD SBI-3 4 at Rev 1 on the Gender Plan on Action, my delegation would like to emphasize that is a very important issue for my country. First, we wish to thank the Secretariat for preparing this update version. Nonetheless, we agree with previous intervention with regards to the short time of reaction and of a review that we had with regards to the Gender Plan of Action. We believe it is a crucial issue and we should have the sufficient time to review the document. As you might know, we have a very small delegation, and the lateness of the release of the document brings more challenge for our delegation to engage. We wish to support Canada's proposal with the creation of a contact group to review in detail and reflect on the plan of action. And lastly, we will also support that indicators of the GBF should be aligned with the Gender Plan of Action to make sure to have a gender-responsive, effective implementation of the whole GBF. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Costa Rica. And I would like to remind you all that, I wanted to give the floor to Costa Rica, but as I said, I closed the list of parties yesterday, so I will now continue, as I said, with the major stakeholder groups. We heard representatives on IPLCs yesterday, and today we continue with women. NGO phone. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I hope I'm seen and heard clearly.
Yes, I hear you.
Taking this, giving us the time today. So I'll keep it very brief and very short, and I will focus our intervention on the gender plan of action. On the CBD/Substa/34 at 2 Rev 1, we thank the Secretariat for having prepared this updated draft outline of the gender plan of action after the second consultations period in March, and we are glad to see a number of our recommendations reflected. However, referring to the earlier draft, the coherence, strength of synergies, and resource use, we recommend that this to be more visibly addressed and specific actions be identified. Coordination among the Rio Conventions and other MEAs is also crucial, and this has also been reflected in document INF 29, which is a report from the Bern 2 consultations. Our three main recommendations are: include the post-2020 gender plan of action into DART to ensure alignment of the GPA throughout the review, reporting, and implementation of the GBF. In our submission and during the Bern 2 consultation, we provided specific recommendations on how and where into the draft this could be done. Again, consulting the Bern 2 report, I would again like to reflect that adequately addressing the recognition and implementation of the human rights to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a key avenue to mainstream biodiversity across sectors and across MEAs to strengthen actions and synergies for the achievement of the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. So cross-cutting issues such as human rights can usefully be integrated into the activities of all MEAs, and this is in reference to page 16 of the Bern 2 report. Further consideration of gender-responsive indicators into the GBF to be aligned with the GPA to ensure the gender-responsive effective implementation of the whole of the GBF. Finally, Chair, we welcome the support document CBD/SBI-3 on Section 7, suggested elements of a draft recommendation, para 19, subpara 4, to the COP to adopt the gender plan of action. It would be important and timely to have a post-2020 GPA adopted alongside the post-2020 GBF. However, to make the post-2020 gender plan of action equitable, there is a need for further considerations of indicators into the plan. We have uploaded a statement and look forward to support from parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Farm speaking on behalf of women. I will now continue with the major stakeholder groups and on behalf of youth. Global Youth Biodiversity Network, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear delegates, we as the Global Youth Biodiversity Network emphasize that we are eager to see the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework succeed. We look forward to putting in significant efforts to ensure that it produces real change on the ground. And without any vested interests, we will continue to take part in this process despite the many difficulties. And this is not something that we say lightly. With this, we take the opportunity to bring forward some points regarding the post-2020 framework which are important to us, and we appeal to you to take these into serious consideration going forward. First, we stress that integrating a rights-based approach in the post-2020 framework and its processes is not merely an option, but an obligation in line with the human rights commitments made by all parties. Issues of equity and rights cannot be siloed into a single target, but should be at the heart of all elements of the framework, from goals and targets to indicators and to its implementation. Otherwise, we risk repeating many of the unintended negative impacts of conservation actions to human dignity, well-being, and freedom. In this regard, we also thank the Secretariat for their work on the updated Gender Plan of Action. Second, we believe that the enabling conditions are key to the success of the framework. Therefore, we call for the embedding of the enabling conditions within the goals and targets to ensure that they are included in NBSAPs, monitored and reported on. Furthermore, among the enabling conditions currently in the draft, there is a need to include elements on guaranteeing human rights, including the right to a safe, clean, healthy environment, ensuring an enabling environment for land and environmental defenders, and ensuring access to remedy and redress. Third, on communication, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network has made significant contributions in outreach, awareness, and uptake of the post-2020 framework already, reaching a large number of a broad range of actors through innovative ways of communication and engagement. Our efforts should be recognized and supported as a key strategy in the communication of the framework. Fourth, we express our concern with the virtual process, which thus far has imposed limitations to our full and effective participation, and these difficulties will have to be seriously addressed before continuing on with the process. And finally, we stress that there is still much to be improved in the framework to ensure it can pave the way for just and impactful implementation and to stop the same patterns of destruction, exploitation, and inequalities that have resulted in devastating loss of nature and culture. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth. Now I ask if there are any more requests on the floor from major stakeholder groups. I have on my list from CBD Alliance. If somebody who would like to speak on behalf of CBD Alliance could raise your hand. No? Okay. Then I will continue. And I will now open the floor for interventions from observers. And please remember that you have 2 minutes for your statements. And I will start to take the intervention from IUCN, followed by UN Women. IUCN, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And IUCN would also like to thank South Africa for raising the issue of the Global Species Action Plan as part of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and also thank Morocco for its support. Elaborating on this topic, species conservation is crucial to the achievement of many of the targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework, not only the obviously critical species-related targets. It's also central to the work of the biodiversity-related conventions and to many other aspects of the framework. Recalling the lack of progress towards Aichi Target 12, IUCN recommends that the GBF needs an implementation support facility in the form of a clear global species action plan to assist parties of all the biodiversity-related conventions to implement the actions that need to be taken to bring about the sustained recovery of wild species. IUCN, with its members, partners, and work with the biodiversity-related conventions, are developing a global species action plan to support governments and other stakeholders achieve the species components of the Global Biodiversity Framework. It will provide capacity, support, and advice on implementation at all scales to determine how to implement all of those aspects of the GBF where species conservation lens will be appropriate to halt the loss of biodiversity and critically to ensure that use is legal and sustainable. The Global Species Action Plan will outline not only the species conservation actions required, but also the tools and support mechanisms to implement them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, IUCN. And I will continue with UN Women, followed by NGO New Wind Association. UN Women, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. UN Women welcomes the document draft outline of a post-2020 gender plan of action and considers it a very good basis for further work. In addition to earlier contributions made on this agenda item, UN Women would like to make the following points. A successful implementation of the actions included in the GPA rests on having adequate and predictable resources and strengthened capacity. In this regard, UN Women would like to stress that key actors, most importantly the CBD Secretariat, parties, UN entities, and others, should create and dedicate human and financial resources to ensure that gender-responsive implementation of the GBF. and the GPA. This includes actions to adequately resource the Secretariat Gender Team and for governments to appoint a dedicated gender focal point to lead the process of gender mainstreaming in their actions to implement the Convention and the post-2020 GPF. To ensure coherence, strengthen synergies, and rationalize resource use, coordination among biodiversity-related MEAs and the other Rio conventions is key. In this regard, parties, UN entities, and secretariats of the conventions and non-governmental actors are strongly encouraged to strengthen coordination and synergies towards implementing the gender-responsive actions across the conventions and MEAs. On the table of actions presented from page 9 of the document, UN Women strongly believes to ensure implementation, monitoring, and reporting, the column on deliverables and timelines must be reviewed and adequately filled out, and parties have to identify priority actions to be carried out and set a midterm review or assessment of the implementation of the actions. This will allow for readjustment of priorities and timelines and ensure a successful implementation of the GPA. UN Women would appreciate parties' support to its proposals and remain committed to actively engage in this process. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UN Women. And I would just like to remind parties that you could use the chat box for express your support for the interventions from observers. I think many of you have done that already, but just a reminder. And finally on my list for observer, NGO, New Wind Association. You have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. So I read this a little bit shorter than what was uploaded, so I hope translators take into account. CBD/SBI/3/4 on item 5 says that it is based on COP14 decision 34, which however required for the post-2020 GBF such comprehensive process which will enable feedback on all issues relevant to the work of the Convention and its protocols, with ample opportunity for those interested to comment or to participate, to achieve accelerated and sustainable transformations to implement the 3 objectives of the Convention supporting life on Earth. In the text of CBD/SBI/3/4, however, nothing demonstrates how all issues relevant to the work of the Convention to implement the balanced whole of the CBD would be addressed in post-2020 GBF. On the contrary, various CBD obligations whose implementation would be crucial to prevent the current global biodiversity loss acceleration are already in advance totally excluded from being implemented or even discussed. There is no space given even to discuss what the implementation of those CBD obligations would require or why these various crucial CBD obligations are excluded. Ensuring the implementation of the CBD obligations on all issues relevant to the work of the Convention as a whole would belong clearly to the task of subsidiary body on implementation, which would have to review the proposed post-2020 GBF to ensure it to become corrected duly to reflect and serve the implementation of the Convention as a whole of the CBD obligations. But none of the SBI/3/4 annex.
Sorry, the time is out. So
okay.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank parties for, I know that you have supported parts of a statement made by behalf of youth, IUCN, and also Front on behalf of women. So thanks a lot for that. See if there are any more requests, any more support in the chat box. No? Okay, thank you. So I see no more requests for the floor on this agenda item. Thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. And we have now reached the conclusion of our first round of discussions on Agenda Item 5 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As we have seen, this item covers a number of different elements, including issues under the Convention and issues under the Cartagena Protocol. For issues under the Convention, I see that I have a lot of common understanding, so I will now prepare a conference room paper on these points with the help of Secretariat. However, I want to acknowledge that a number of parties in their interventions yesterday proposed the establishment of a contact group related to a post-2020 Gender Plan of Action, noting its importance. However, given that we did not hear any major point of divergence on this issue, that a number of parties have called for intersessional work and is very little amount of time available for contact groups, I will not establish a contact group on this issue at this time, and I thank you in advance for your understanding. But as I understand it, that in line, many of you have requested that we need to have more time for inputs on this Gender Plan of Action, and I'm sure that the Secretariat will see if we can have some more time to provide more inputs on this later on. So be assured, we have noted that request, but just to be clear, I cannot establish a contact group on this issue at this time. Thank you. For the post-2020 implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol, I see there is a need for more detailed discussion. I therefore suggest we establish a contact group to work on this further. The mandate of a contact group would be to review and agree on the structure and content of implementation plan and capacity building action plan, working on the basis of document CBD/SBI/3/18. The contact group will be chaired by Mr. Rigobert Nentep from Cameroon and Ms. Rita Andorko from Hungary. The contact group will hold its first meeting on Friday, the 4th of June, from noon to 15 Montreal Eastern Time. And I ask for your usual spirit of collaboration and compromise so the contact group can complete its mandate and deliver clean text for consideration by plenary. In keeping with the timeline as contained in Annex to the scenario note, we will take up Agenda Item 5 to review the CRPs in the coming days. Please refer to the Secretariat website for updates. And let us now turn to the next agenda item. I now invite delegates to turn to Agenda Item 12 on specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol. First, I would like to take this opportunity to remember Miss Marie Aguilar. She was the ABS National Focal Point and National Coordinator of a global ABS project in Honduras and recently passed away due to COVID-19. We remember her dedicated and committed work to biodiversity and ABS. May her soul rest in peace. Please join me for a moment of silence. Thank you. I will now turn to agenda item 12. Before we proceed with statements, kindly recall that this item was considered during our informal session on March 12 and 14, 2021. At that time, interventions were heard from 11 parties and regional groups and 3 observers with no additional written submissions. I would now like to give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents on this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, in order to facilitate your deliberations on this item, item 12, the Executive Secretary has prepared and made available document CBD/SBI/3/14 on specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol. This document contains, in Section 6, elements of a recommendation, which also includes an annex, as a suggestion for the consideration of SBI. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor for interventions on agenda item 12. As this item is under the Nagoya Protocol, I will open the floor for interventions by parties to the Nagoya Protocol first, followed by other governments and observers, time permitting. I encourage you to keep your statement short and concise. Again, before I open the floor for interventions, due to the limited time we have, I would like to ask those parties and observers that delivered a statement on this item at the informal session to take the floor only in the event that you wish to add something to your previous intervention. In developing the CRP, all the comments and suggestions made in your statements, whether in March or today, will be considered carefully. So I will start to ask if there are any statements from regional groups. And if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand up button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow, and your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. So if Malawi, are you speaking on behalf of the African group?
Yes.
Please, okay, Malawi, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As already stated, I'm making this statement on behalf of the African region as we did in the informal session, Africa had already submitted its views through its continental body of the African Union regarding this item in previous calls for views. And this statement will reiterate some of the points that were made then and include additional issues to reflect developments that took place in the interim. Taking into account the spirit and the letter of the law of the convention, the African region is of the view that the Nagoya Protocol is the general context that addresses issues of access and benefit sharing for the purposes of the Convention on Biological Diversity, according to Article 4, Paragraph 4. The African group recognizes that this paragraph, that the Nagoya Protocol does not simply incorporate other ABS instruments, but rather functions as the prevailing regime operating in the absence of specialized ABS instruments that meet certain conditions. That being the case, the objectives of the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol can hence assist in providing the basis for the development of criteria for the identification of specialized ABS instruments. With regards to the specialized international ABS instruments, currently the most common one for the African countries is the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. The special nature of the agricultural biodiversity are acknowledged in the protocol, including its multilateral system that is acknowledged to have been developed in harmony with the CBD. The basis for a multilateral system is due to the existence of high interdependence on plant genetic resources by many countries. According to most African parties to the treaty, hence where plant genetic resources destined for food and agriculture are concerned, and only for purposes of research, breeding, and training for food security and sustainable agriculture, the treaty's multilateral system of benefit sharing mechanism.
Please, could you please slow down a little? Thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to keep up with the time. Okay, the treaty's multilateral system of benefit sharing mechanisms applies to the genetic resources within its scope, and the attendant domestic measures provide for access to be facilitated and regulated by the provisions of the treaty. We, however, also note with concern that the discussions and processes to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system under the treaty could not be completed after more than 6 years of effort due to insurmountable differences about how to deal with digital sequence information. The African region would therefore like to point out that the outcomes of our forthcoming discussions on how to share the benefits arising from the use of DSI will have a significant impact not only on ongoing discussions under the treaty, but on all current and future efforts to negotiate specialized ABS instruments. The WHO's Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework for the sharing of influenza viruses and access to vaccines and other benefits is another international process concerning a specialized type and use of genetic resources. Recognizing that the framework is intended to serve as a public health instrument that seeks to better prepare the world to respond to pandemic influenza, the PIP framework is intended to improve and strengthen the sharing of influenza viruses with human pandemic potential. This objective of this framework goes in line with objectives of the Nagoya Protocol regarding the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources, and by appropriate transfer of technologies, considering the rights over those resources and the technologies. Therefore, the expectation of the African region is that the processes under the PIP framework and any other initiatives under WHO relevant to pathogen sharing practices also go in line with the provisions of domestic and international measures as per the Nagoya Protocol, in a mutually supportive manner, including clear benefit sharing provisions. Likewise, the African region notes the endeavor of the World Intellectual Property Organization to develop a legal regime to ensure the balanced and effective protection of genetic resources, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions. Whilst recognizing the relevance of the notion, the region cautions that there is need to include provisions on the management and control measures against potential fragmentation of international ABS instruments and avoid legal uncertainties. The proliferation of international ABS instruments may have regressive effects on national implementation, coordination, and accountability, which will further impact implementation at other ends. Hence, the criteria should ensure recognition of provider countries of genetic resources, indigenous peoples and local communities, and compliance measures on its elements to ensure legal certainty. Inclusion of information sharing mechanisms and clarification on whether the relevant information would be made available through the ABS Clearinghouse of the Nagoya Protocol, or each specialized international instruments will also be useful to ascertain clarity in implementation endeavor by parties to either instruments. Madam Chair, lastly, the African region recognizes that the fundamental value of an international specialized instrument on ABS is evident to ensure legal certainty on applicable rules and translation of these rules into domestic measures. The African region places emphasis on importance of discussion and agreements on clear criteria that will determine international instruments to be considered specialized and hence fall outside the scope of the CBD and its Nagoya Protocol. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll submit the rest of the bigger chunk through the link provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Malawi, speaking on behalf of the African region. I will now give the floor to the European Union, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. You have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the colleagues, and good morning, Madam Chair. So I guess you can hear me well, right? Okay. Thanks, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. This statement builds upon our first reading intervention as done at the occasion of the virtual informal meeting of the SBI in March 2021. Our views on this agenda item, as expressed then, are still valid, and we will focus today on those aspects on which we would like to suggest improvements and amendments to the draft recommendation and its annex. We appreciate the work done by the Secretariat in preparing the draft text for this agenda item and wish to reiterate our readiness to continue discussing this important topic further. As said in previous discussion on this agenda item, Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the protocol concerning specialized ABS international instruments cannot be considered in isolation of the other paragraphs of Article 4. All paragraphs of the article should inform the interpretation and discussion concerning what constitutes a specialized international ABS instrument. We thus think that this should be better reflected.
Excuse me, could you please also slow down a little?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, apologies for that. We think that this aspect should be better reflected in the text of the draft recommendation, more precisely by adding a reference to paragraphs 1 to 3, where paragraph 4 of Article 4 is recalled. With regard to the invitation to parties and other governments to take into account the indicative criteria in developing and or applying access and benefit sharing measures, we suggest to extend it also to possible cases for endorsement of international instruments that include provisions on access and benefit sharing, in line with the indication provided in paragraph 2 of the annex. We acknowledge that in the interest of having agile instruments to respond to potential new issues, like a pandemic, for instance, it might be important in some situations that such instruments are agreed by an intergovernmental process. This aspect should be better framed in the text of the draft recommendation. However, as we stated in previous occasions, we believe that it is not essential that the instrument is developed via an intergovernmental process. We also recall that the study from which the criteria were derived merely refers to a need for such instruments to be agreed by such a process, but does not call for them to be developed by an intergovernmental process. There was thus an inaccuracy in the text of the potential criteria annexed to the Nagoya Protocol Decision 3/14, and we note that this inaccuracy, namely the alleged requirement that specialized international instruments also be developed by an intergovernmental process, is still present in the text of the current draft recommendation. Hence, we would like to suggest to remove this alleged requirement. We will submit our suggestions for amendments in writing on the basis of what we just explained. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, European Union, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. Are there any more requests from the regions? So please. No, I see no more requests from the regions. So I will now open the floor for interventions by parties to the Nagoya Protocol first. And if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list, and when I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. And I would also like to remind you to speak slowly and pause between your sentences, so for help our hard-working interpreters. I will start by giving the floor to South Africa, followed by Indonesia, and then UK. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize, my camera is not working this morning. So I'll start my position. South Africa supports the statement made by Malawi on behalf of the African region. South Africa understands that Article 4 of the protocol seeks to clarify the relationship between the protocol and the relevant existing or future international agreements. Hence, see the proposed criteria seeking to provide reference points on the key elements to consider when recognizing specialized international ABS instruments. These criteria could assist parties to clarify or to take a decision on the relationship between the protocol and other specialized international ABS instruments at a national level. Therefore, we welcome a synthesis of views and information provided to inform our consideration of this agenda item. However, in terms of the potential criteria, the following elements should be considered. The specialized international ABS instrument should be mutually supportive to the objectives of the Convention and the Protocol. In particular, the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. It should recognize the sovereign rights of parties to recognize any other specialized international ABS instrument as long as it is consistent with the objectives of the CBD and the Protocol. As such, there is no need for a formal established process to recognize them at a global level. It should also include provider countries, indigenous peoples, and local communities, and compliance measures on its elements for ensuring legal certainty. It should not provide provisions that will weaken the legally binding provisions of the protocol. It should be explicit on how to address issues of indigenous peoples and local communities, prior informed consent, and mutually agreed terms. Mechanism and clarify whether the relevant information would be made available through the ABS clearinghouse of the protocol, or each specialized international ABS instrument would have a similar tool. It should not create any hierarchy between the protocol and other specialized international ABS instruments. Finally, we would like to emphasize cautions against potential fragmentation of international ABS instruments, and also emphasize that the proliferation of international ABS instruments may have deleterious effects on national implementation, coordination, and accountability. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I will now give the floor to Indonesia, followed by UK and then Malaysia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, concerning the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol, Indonesia is the view that specialized international ABS, as being embodied on page 6, point C on Criteria 1, should be intergovernmentally agreed. Taking into account the special conditions and circumstances, purposes, and utilization of genetic resources of respective members of Nagoya Protocol, we all need to conduct serious efforts to establish a solid systems in implementing and consistently test the provision of Article 4, Paragraph 4. Indonesia believes that this solid system of implementation of said paragraph can be utilized to bridge the legal gaps, if any, from Nagoya protocols to other international ABS instruments. Indonesia takes a profound consideration that creating a formulating new specialized ABS instruments will eventually and gradually undermine the effective implementation of the main objective of the Nagoya Protocol on benefit sharing. Therefore, the use of Article 4, Paragraph 4 needs to be assessed very thoroughly. Indonesia takes note the set of criteria 2 as being further embodied in page 7 on specialized international ABS instrument. Indonesia would like to seek further elaboration concerning this matter, particularly on the question of should be specialized. Indonesia believes and cannot stress enough on the importance of protection and regulating effectively the genetic resources, traditional knowledge, and folklore. In this opportunity, allow us to update the members that the mandate for ITC negotiation has not been carried out in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, the IGC of GRTKF is expected to renew its mandate for the biennium 2020-2021. Indonesia also welcomes the initiative of relevant international organizations and intergovernmental process to take into account the indicative criteria in their efforts to develop international instruments that include provisions on access and benefit sharing. For example, UNCLOS, BBNG, WIPO, GRTKF. Indonesia commits to actively participate and contribute to these intergovernmental processes. Thank you, Chair. We also already submit our suggestion to the Secretary.
Thank you, Indonesia. And I will continue to give the floor to UK, followed by Malaysia and then Argentina. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The comments made by the UK at the informal session of SBI-3 still apply, including on the need for an agile and responsive process for recognising specialised international ABS instruments. We would like to highlight 3 additional points. Firstly, it is important that any indicative criteria that are adopted should consider existing ABS mechanisms, so as not to negatively impact on their functionality. For example, any indicative criteria and processes should not jeopardise the efficiency of the PIP framework. Secondly, to add clarity to the indicative criteria and to ensure that the process for recognising international specialised instruments is not unnecessarily slowed, we suggest the removal of developed from paragraph 2 of the annex. Finally, for further clarity in paragraph 2, we suggest replacing and/or with just or. We have a few other minor suggestions to improve the text that we will also submit in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UK. And before I continue, I know that many of you have uploaded your statement before you deliver it in plenary, but I would highly recommend all of you to try, if possible, to upload your statements before you deliver it, because it's very helpful for interpreters. Thank you very much in advance. I will continue with Malaysia, followed by Argentina and then Switzerland. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. Malaysia became a party to the Nagoya Protocol in 2019, demonstrating our strong commitment to achieving the third objective of the CBD. We would like to share that this commitment has been translated by the enforcement of the Malaysia's Access to Biological Resource and Benefit Sharing Act on 18 December 2020. On this agenda, Malaysia is of the opinion that the identified criteria contained in Section 2 of CBD/SBI/3/14 document can be the basis of a specialized ABS instrument between countries, regions, and global. It is clear that more consultations are needed between national competent authorities and relevant competent authorities especially on the type of biological resources covered. Finally, although the result would be mutually beneficial, Malaysia will monitor its development internationally through various forums and would consider it to be applied domestically. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. And I will now continue with Argentina, followed by Switzerland and then Mexico. Argentina, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Argentina welcomes the documents developed on this agenda item. We consider that it's very useful to have criteria that serve to guide the development and/or recognition of specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments. In addition to what we said during the SBI informal sessions, we have proposed changes to the draft recommendation and annex. These aim to clarify that these criteria should not weaken the sovereign rights of states to recognize or not a specialized international ABS instrument, nor the legally binding provisions that arise from the Nagoya Protocol. And we will put in these changes in writing. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. And I will now give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Mexico and then Peru. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switzerland would like to recall its comments made during the informal SBI meeting in March 2021. In general, we are of the view that the decision to recognize a specialized international instrument under the Article 4, Paragraph 4 can be taken by each party or group of parties by themselves. However, coordination and cooperation among different fora and instruments is important to ensure consistency, harmony, and mutual supportiveness among different instruments. We also take note of the indicative criteria, which in our view shall serve only as a general and non-prescriptive guideline for parties. The suggested reporting in national reports and further review in context of the assessment and review process is an appropriate way forward. As regards the draft recommendation and the annex containing the indicative criteria, we propose some minor changes that we have submitted in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. And I now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Peru. Mexico, you have the floor.
Buenos días a todos.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico thanks the SBI for its work and takes note of the information and the synthesis of the views on potential criteria for a specialized international ABS instrument. And in the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol, we respectfully invite the parties to reconsider the relevance of creating other specialized international ABS instruments, given that this could negatively impact the interests of the Convention's objectives, particularly of the Nagoya Protocol, by fragmenting the spirit of this instrument. We recognize the difficulties with implementation of the Nagoya Protocol in mega-diverse countries such as Mexico. That is why we need to make progress towards full implementation thereof, seeking to include specific cases. We highlight the importance of parties' sovereign rights to decide on the recognition and the form of participation in the process of creating a specialized international ABS instrument. We believe that any specialized international instrument created should recognize mega-diverse countries as the main custodians of genetic resources, as well as recognizing the value of these resources for IPLCs as part of their biocultural wealth. Thus, it is key to guarantee the rights established in other international conventions, in particular human rights, including collective rights of Indigenous peoples, such as those related to free, informed consent, as established in the ILO Convention 169 and also in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This possible specialized international instrument should be aligned with the Convention's objectives and also the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, taking up the concept of lex specialis, no type of hierarchy should be created between the protocol and other specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. And finally, on my list for parties to the Nagoya Protocol, I have Peru. Peru, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, in Peru, we wish to recognise the work carried out by the Executive Secretary and the efforts of the parties so that we can have effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. And Peru, as a mega-diverse country, recognises that there needs to be mutual support between the parties to guarantee fair participation in the benefits granted by the Nagoya Protocol so that we can generate incentives to conserve biodiversity and also to have sustainable use of its components. This will allow us to even improve more our contribution of biodiversity to sustainable development and to human well-being. Within that context, Peru is making progress on the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, and we are in the process of drawing up a regulatory framework so that we can strengthen implementation of ABS in our country, and also our capacities and management mechanisms and linkages between different agencies. And we have been able to count on support as well. And then on Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol, we consider that the specialised instruments should support and not run counter to the objectives of the Convention on Biodiversity as well as the Nagoya Protocol, and should be based on criteria to ensure the participation in the benefits when using specific genetic resources that are covered by a specialized instrument and for the purposes thereof. So in this respect, Peru considers that we need to specify further the indicative criteria for the development and the recognition of international specialized instrument for ABS and also for participating in the benefits within Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the protocol, and that this should be annexed. So in the decision to ensure benefit sharing with the providers of the genetic resources and also the associated traditional knowledge. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, we did not have the text.
Thank you, Peru. And that is the final on my list for parties to Nagoya Protocol. However, I would like to open the floor for any interventions from other parties to the Convention or other governments. I see none. We will then move to interventions from onto observers, and I will start with the major groups, followed by other observers. And I don't have so many requests on the floor from major groups. I have on my list, I only have a representative for FARN speaking on behalf of women or major groups. I hope that's right. NGO FARN, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Yesenia Hernandez speaking on behalf of CDB Women Caucus.
We recognize the importance of having an indicative criteria and an specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of the Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol. In this regard, it's crucial to conduct this process with full and effective participation of right holders related with genetic resources, indigenous peoples and local communities that are genetic resources keepers and traditional knowledge holders, youth and women, especially these last as seats guardians and traditional knowledge keepers, scientists and local leaders. In regard with the draft recommendations suggested, we have the next proposals. In the page 12, section 6, paragraph 4, to add with special interest in those that have more access and benefit sharing initiatives, especially the mega-diverse ones, or with genetic resources of interest for further utilization, to read as follows. Request parties with special interest in those that have more access and benefit sharing initiatives, especially the mega-diverse ones, or with genetic resources of interest. Regarding the annex text related to the indicative special criteria, we suggest to add in the section 4C, based on free, prior, informed consent and mutually agreed terms when this applies, to read as follows. 4C, legal certainty with respect to access and benefit to genetic resources or traditional knowledge and benefit sharing, based on free, prior, informed consent and mutually agreed terms when this applies. We ask for support of the parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Fawn, on behalf of women. I see no more requests from major stakeholder groups, so I open the floor for interventions from other observers. And please remember you have 2 minutes for your statements. And I would also like to remind parties that you can express your support through the chat box to the interventions by observers. So I will start to give the floor to UNFO, followed by Third World Network. UNFO, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I certainly will be brief. This is an opportunity to address the session again on implementation on behalf of the international treaty, FAO's international treaty on this specific agenda item. And in line with the statements made during the informal session of SBI, allow me first to reiterate that we are pleased that while the overall scope of the international treaty is all plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, its work as a specialized international ABS instrument has been recognized in the documentation prepared for this agenda item. Our close collaboration with the Secretariat of the CBD and other partners has allowed us over the years to undertake activities that have directly contributed to supporting mutual supportiveness in the implementation of both the Convention and its Nagoya Protocol and the international treaty. As a direct result, we are pleased to see that an increasing number of countries have been able to develop coherent and clearly articulated mutually supportive approaches to implementing these instruments. Finally, Madam Chair, let me conclude by saying that we look forward to many more opportunities to further and enhance our collaboration with your Secretariat as we work towards our common objective of ensuring mutual supportiveness in the implementation of the international treaty, the Convention, and its Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. Let us capitalize on the success of our joint capacity development efforts to serve as a means and reference for the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework upon its approval. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UNFO. And I will now give the floor to NGO Third World Network. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recall our statement to the informal session in March, which remains valid. Efforts to enhance the multilateral system of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture regrettably failed as many developed countries tried to conclude a specialized international instrument, or SII, that omitted a commitment to benefit sharing for DSI, in deviation from obligations under the Convention and the Nagoya Protocol. The key lesson is that any proposed SII must faithfully uphold the obligations of the Convention, particularly fair and equitable benefit sharing. The Convention must remain alert to and engage in the process of development of any putative SII in order to ensure its consistency with and support of the Nagoya Protocol. This is particularly important now because of movement towards the development of ABS arrangements for pathogens at the WHO. At WHO and in health, the drug and vaccine industry remains at best avoidant and at worst hostile to fair and equitable benefit sharing, as evidenced by the shocking inequities in access to treatments for COVID-19 and the misappropriation of Ebola virus DSI by companies to develop proprietary products. We therefore propose amendments to the preambular paragraph to read, recalling Article 4 and Article 5 of the Protocol, and propose additional text at the end of paragraphs 2 and 3, ensuring consistency with the objective of the Convention and the Nagoya Protocol for fair and equitable benefit sharing. Further, it is necessary that all the indicative criteria have to be applied. Paragraphs 2 and 3 should therefore invite the relevant entities to apply all the indicative criteria to a clearly defined set of genetic resources. We also propose an additional paragraph 1 bis that notes that all of the indicative criteria are applicable to any SII. SIIs must also address DSI in a manner consistent with the Convention and Nagoya Protocol and respect the rights of IPLCs. Finally, review of candidate SIIs and their consistency with the Convention should be regular, and the criteria should be addressed at COPMOP 4. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Third World Network. I see no more requests for the floor from observers. So thank you very much. We have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on Agenda Item 12, Specialized International Access and Benefit Sharing Instruments in the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol. I note that we have some support for the Third World Network in the chat. Thanks for that. Malawi supports Third World Network. And colleagues, I see that we have a lot of common understanding of the draft recommendations, and I will now prepare a conference room paper with the help of a secretariat. In keeping with our schedule of meetings, we will take up Agenda Item 12 to review the CRP in the coming days. Please refer to the proposed timeline in the annex to the scenario note to this session, as well as the Secretariat website. So, colleagues, I think we now will take a 15-minute break, and we will reconvene. Judy, will you take a try to save? Please tell us when we will reconvene.
I will use better math skills this time. 8:35, please. 8:35. Thanks.
8:35. Yes, please. And colleagues, please retain your connection during the break. There is no need to log off. And after a break, I will start with Agenda Item 13. So thank you very much. Have a nice break.
Colleagues, welcome back. I hope you have enjoyed your break. Let us now proceed with agenda item 13 on Global Multilateral Benefit Sharing Mechanism, Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol. Before we proceed with statements, kindly recall that this item was considered during our informal session on March 14, 2021. At that time, interventions were heard from 9 parties and regional groups and 2 observers, with 1 additional written submission. I would like to invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents on agenda item 13. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 13 focuses on the Global Multilateral Benefit Sharing Mechanism, Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol. Document CBD/SBI/3/15 was prepared by the Executive Secretary to guide the discussions on this item. Document CBD/SBI/3/15 Addendum 1 contains the peer-reviewed study to identify specific cases of genetic resources and traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources that occur in transboundary situations or for which it is not possible to grant or obtain prior informed consent as requested by the COP in Decision Nagoya Protocol, Decision 313. The subsidiary body will be invited to consider the outcomes of the study suggested elements of a recommendation as outlined in Section 3 of document CBD/SBI/3/15 as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And again, before I open the floor for interventions, due to the limited time we have, I would ask those parties and observers that delivered a statement on this item at the informal session to take the floor only in the event that you wish to add something to your previous intervention. In developing the CRP, all the comments and suggestions made in your statements, whether in March or today, will be considered carefully. So I will start with statements from regional groups. And I will start to give the floor to South Africa, speaking on behalf of the African region. South Africa, you have the floor. If South Africa could activate your microphone.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. South Africa is speaking on behalf of the African Group. The African Group appreciates this opportunity to make formal contribution to this agenda item, and we will focus our intervention on additional contribution to our previous statement, which was delivered during the informal session on SBI. Madam Chair, we welcome the note prepared by the Executive Secretary, which covers the synthesis of informations and views submitted by parties, non-parties, organizations, and stakeholders, as well as the findings from the study commissioned. We strongly believe that this synthesis represents the views of all parties, especially considering the consultative approach utilized by the author to gather input into the study. It is worth noting that the written submission made by the African Group represents more than 50 countries in Africa. Madam Chair, The African group is prepared to negotiate in good faith on the basis of the draft recommendations that are provided in this document, and is therefore urging the parties to cooperate and advance the discussion on these agenda items towards the relevant modalities for the operationalization of the Article 10. Our justification is that a constituted global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism could contribute to resource mobilization and also generate an incentive for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. In light of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, this mechanism will be able to generate concrete numeric baseline on ABS now and beyond 2030 milestone. And this is because the Nagoya Protocol cannot be implemented in parts, but should be implemented in a holistic manner. Madam Chair, our text proposal on the draft recommendation focuses on the following aspects of the preamble as well as the operative parts. It's focusing on the objective of the Nagoya Protocol, the scope of Article 15, Paragraph 1 of the Convention, recognition of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, the need for and modalities of a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, relevance of Article 11 of the Protocol, the role of the Executive Secretary and the Bureau when establishing the ATEC, the ideal platform for negotiating the modalities of a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. The full details are included in the statement that we have already submitted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa, speaking on behalf of the African region. I will now give the floor to European Union, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. European Union, you have the floor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Okay, it should be working now. Yeah. Thanks, Madam Chair. Good afternoon again. Okay. Distinguished delegates, I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Our comments on this agenda item, as expressed at the time of the informal virtual meeting of the SBI, still stand. And today we would just like to reiterate and complement a few points which are also relevant for the amendments that we're going to submit to the draft recommendation. I wish to recall that the EU and its member states remain very committed to responding to the undertaking of Article 10 to consider the need for and modalities of a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. And on this regard, we also wish to recall that any discussion concerning the need and the modalities for such a global mechanism.
Sorry to interrupt, could you please slow down? Sorry, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem. Apologies again. So I was just saying that all discussions on this agenda item must not reopen discussions on the temporal and geographic scope of the Nagoya Protocol and must not undermine the fundamental aspects of the protocol, such as the principle that the protocol only covers genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge which fall under the sovereignty of parties. As we explained at the meeting in March, we consider that the study contained in document CBD/SBI-3/15 at 1. The cases brought forward by parties and other stakeholders do not identify situations where it is not possible to grant or obtain PIC, but they rather list cases either falling outside of the scope of the protocol or requiring progress in its implementation. And on this last aspect, we believe that the focus of the parties should be on making the protocol fully operational through enacting effective domestic ABS measures. Overall, in our view, the need for a global mechanism under Article 10 has not been established, and therefore discussing modalities is premature. But we will thus suggest amendments to draft recommendations and its annex in line with our comments as expressed today and at the informal meeting, but we also want to reiterate our availability to continue discussion around the need for a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism if other parties wish to do so. Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies again.
Thank you very much, European Union, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. I see no more requests from regional groups. So I will continue to open the floor for intervention by parties. And since this is an item under Nagoya Protocol, I will open the floor for interventions by parties to the Nagoya Protocol first, followed by other parties to the Convention, other governments and observers, time permitting. And I also encourage you to keep your statement short and concise, but please do not speak too fast. So I open the floor for interventions by parties. And if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. And when I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. So I will start to give the floor to Malaysia, followed by Indonesia, and then Mexico. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Malaysia would like to share our experience to shed light on possible future directions of this agenda. In order to have access to biological resource and traditional knowledge associated with biological resources held by indigenous and local communities, it is a mandatory requirement under the Malaysia's Access to Biological Resource and Benefit Sharing Act for the resource user to obtain the prior informed consent. Prior informed consent is a fundamental concept of the ABS regime in the CBD and in the Nagoya Protocol. The elements of prior informed consent under the Malaysia's ABS Act are the same as for prior informed consent under international law, such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In respect of traditional knowledge associated with biological resources, prior informed consent must be obtained in accordance with the indigenous and local communities' customary laws and practices, protocols, and procedures. Malaysia, therefore, suggests that any global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism formulated must be considered carefully in line with the aspirations of the Nagoya Protocol. This is also in line with Section 3 of CBD/SBI/3/15 document on the suggested elements of a recommendation for global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. It is Malaysia's opinion that the establishment of an ad hoc technical working group with the terms of reference outlined in Annex of the CBD/SBI/3/15 document could help contribute towards an acceptable multilateral benefit sharing mechanisms, and therefore Malaysia supports this initiative. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. And I will now give the floor to Indonesia, followed by Mexico and then UK. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegate and colleague, on this agenda item 13, Indonesia would like to highlight several points as following. Pursuant to the para 17 on document number CBD/SBI/3/15, Indonesia support the motion that science and knowledge need information openness to obtain a more holistic result. However, we need to be also clear in defining and separating the issue of benefit sharing that related to commercial purposes from the information openness that we just mentioned. Therefore, Indonesia cannot align itself to nor support the motion of development of an open access system for genetic resources, since the term of open access cannot be found nor even governed in Nagoya Protocol. Furthermore, this specific term has not been discussed, agreed, nor obtained a full consensus from the members. Article 11 of the Nagoya Protocol emphasizes the importance of cooperations and not to open access regime. The principle that needs to be upheld by member is that effective submission and request should be submitted and effective approval should be granted from the provider. Indonesia welcome and highly appreciate the study result by Mr. Bangle and Mr. Peronwelt that has been conveyed by the Secretariat. Concerning this matter, Indonesia is of the view that the approach and the implementation of Article 11 need to be upheld strongly. This is in order to foster cooperation as mentioned in CBD/SBI/3/15 Add 1 on specific cases in point 2.1, 3.2, and 4.3. On DSI, Indonesia is of the view that DSI is an integral part of genetic resources. Therefore, the traceability to obtain prior informed consent is highly implementable, as well as issue contained in case publicly available traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources. In addition to this, Indonesia strongly views that publicly available information should not be considered and treated as public domain. Furthermore, Indonesia would like to seek clarification on Para 26. On Para 28, Indonesia view that on that particular cases, benefit sharing shall only be conducted to countries that identified as country that possess significant distribution area or country that is eligible to form prior informed consent and not share globally without a true consideration on geographical distribution of genetic resources. On Para 29, Indonesia encouraged the Secretariat to continue cooperations and synergy, particularly on CITES, to overcome and effectively address the issue of further development and utilizations of the community resulted from trade. Lastly, having said the above-mentioned point, Indonesia strongly supports the establishment of AHTEC on the Global Multilateral Benefit Sharing Mechanism with the term of reference embodied in Annex document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I will now give the floor to Mexico, followed by UK and then Switzerland. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico thanks the subsidiary body on implementation for the synthesis of the study to identify a possible global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. Nevertheless, we consider that we need to weigh up the financial costs and analyze the policy implications to assess the relevance of creating this aforementioned global mechanism. We reiterate that exercising their sovereignty implies that states must participate in the tutelage, control, and monitoring of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge within their jurisdictions, which could be in conflict with the establishment of a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. Thus, we consider that we need to ensure that state parties and other governments may establish control measures, monitoring, and traceability of access to physical genetic resources, including DSI within their jurisdiction or through ex situ access to genetic material, confirming each party's sovereignty over their resources. In the specific cases of mega-diverse countries, parties to the Convention and other governments should ensure that access to genetic resources, including DSI through big data, is beneficial to these mega-diverse countries, in particular beneficial to their indigenous peoples and local communities, who, since time immemorial, have played an essential role in maintaining traditional knowledge and use in their territories, thereby contributing to the conservation of biodiversity. Therefore, we need to propose and discuss modalities of the benefit sharing mechanisms, including the modes of sharing and distributing of benefits, as well as the options for cooperation described in Article 11 of the Nagoya Protocol. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. And I will now give the floor to UK, followed by Switzerland. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. The comments provided by the UK on this item at the informal session of SBI-3 still apply. We would like to highlight one point in relation to the draft recommendation. As stated in recalling Article 11 of the Nagoya Protocol, which requires parties to endeavour to cooperate in instances where genetic resources are found in transboundary situations, we do not believe that the need for a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism under the Nagoya Protocol has been demonstrated, and therefore establishing an ATEG to consider the modalities of such a mechanism is premature. With this in mind, we have made some suggested text changes that we will submit in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. UK, it was brief. And finally on my list, Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will also be very brief. Switzerland would like to recall its comments made during the informal SBI meeting in March 2021. In general, Switzerland supports the efficient and practical implementation of the bilateral approach of the Nagoya Protocol. Regarding the considerations on a multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, we are of the view that many of the cases identified in the study and the submissions fall outside of the scope of the Nagoya Protocol or can be addressed under Article 11 of the Nagoya Protocol. Nevertheless, the identified cases also reveal potential limitations or challenges of the bilateral approach, which may be further evaluated to analyze the underlying causes and how these limitations or challenges could be addressed, including by Article 11, as well as with a multilateral approach. Accordingly, we propose some changes to the draft recommendations, which we have submitted in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I see no more requests from parties to the Nagoya Protocol, so I open the floor to see if any requests from parties to the Convention or other governments. No, I see no more requests. So I will, yes, I see Brazil. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see you again. As we had the chance to state previously, Brazil welcomes document SBI-3/15. There are comments presented during the informal session still stand. We appreciate the solid synthesis of views and information presented in this document, which demonstrates that a growing number of parties recognize specific cases that would require the establishment of a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. As previously expressed, Brazil supports the implementation of the global mechanism. Bearing that in mind, Brazil appreciates the recommendation to establish an ad hoc technical expert group, and we hope the ATAG will help us achieve a comprehensive understanding of all cases within the scope of Article 10. Regarding the terms of reference of the ATAG, it is of utmost importance to ensure an equitable regional representation in its composition. We hope to have constructive discussions on this agenda item. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. So I see no more requests from other parties to convention, other government, so I will continue to the major stakeholder groups. And on my list, I only have a request from FARM, NGO FARM, speaking on behalf of women organization. NGO FARM, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Yesenia Hernandez, speaking on behalf of the CD Women Caucus. The Nagoya Protocol is a new instrument to aim the third objective of the Convention on Biological Diversity and contribute to the conservation and sustainable use of biological and genetic resources. Has some challenge such as those recognized by parties in their specific case of genetic resources and traditional knowledge, associated with genetic resources that the parties of the Nagoya Protocol and other stakeholders that are not covered under the bilateral approach under the Nagoya Protocol. This situation supports the need for a global multilateral benefit-sharing mechanism. We have the next concerns regarding the multilateral mechanism of ABEs. First, we recommend that the building process of this new instrument take special consideration to the particular conditions, rights, and interests of indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth when they are providers, and to enable them to be users of genetic resources in the future. We note that the sample for this discussion needs to be increased to have more information and make the best decision. But in regard the document, we have a special proposals. In the paragraph 36, change Aichi targets for post-2020 framework, and to add at the end after providers with special considerations to indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. In the paragraph 38, in the Part B, add after sectors that has been traditionally contributed to the existence of genetic resources with potential economic importance. In section 3, elements for a recommendation, in the paragraph 3, to add after local communities, women and youth. The discussion about a new multilateral mechanism on ABEs needs to be addressed with the pertinent timeline and with the participation of parties, indigenous peoples and local communities, women, youth, in order to have the best options and enable the mechanism to promote successfully access and benefit sharing initiatives to aim the third objective of the Convention. We look forward to the support of the parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for speaking on behalf of women. And I would also like to remind parties that you can express your support through the chat box to the interventions by observers. I see no more requests from major stakeholder groups, so I open the floor for other observers. Please note you have 2 minutes for your statement. And I see UNFO, you have the floor.
Thanks again, Madam Chair, for this opportunity to further address this session of the SBI on this specific agenda item. Under its Article 10.2, the international treaty indeed establishes a multilateral system of access and benefit sharing, quote, which is efficient, effective, and transparent, both to facilitate access to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, and to share in a fair and equitable way the benefits arising from the utilization of these resources on a complementary and mutually reinforcing basis. The multilateral system has currently over 2.1 million samples of plant genetic material available to contracting parties for easy access and exchange so that they can conduct research and grow food for the growing world population. Under the multilateral system, benefit sharing includes financial and non-financial benefits, such as training, knowledge exchange, capacity development programs. On the financial side, the treaty's benefit sharing fund provides financial support to agricultural development projects and programs in over 55 developing countries. Therefore, experience in the implementation of the international treaty and its multilateral system offer lessons that are of direct relevance to the current discussions on the global benefit sharing mechanism. The Secretariat of the International Treaty therefore looks forward to providing inputs during these discussions and to engaging with parties, secretariats, and other stakeholders. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. UNFO. I see no more requests from observers. So, well, colleagues, we have now reached the conclusion of discussion on agenda item 13. And thank you for your interventions. We have heard a range of views on this item, and I think I would like to establish a contact group to discuss these ideas more thoroughly. The contact group will be chaired by Mr. S. Kerketa of India and Mr. Thomas Graeber of Germany. It will hold its first meeting, and I have to ask the Secretariat, when will the contact group meet? Is it the 2nd of June?
Yes, it's on 2nd of June at 7 a.m. Montreal time.
Thank you very much.
But check the schedule all the time.
Yes, please always check the schedule. Changes can, of course, happen, but for now it's planned to hold its first meeting of the 2nd of June at 7 a.m. Montreal time. And I look forward to seeing the outcomes from the contact group in the coming days. Let us now turn to the next agenda item. So, distinguished delegates, I now invite delegates to turn to agenda item 10 on review of the effectiveness of the processes under the Convention and its protocols. Before we proceed with statements, kindly recall that this item was considered during our informal session on March 14, 2021. At that time, interventions were heard from 6 parties and regional groups and 3 observers, with 1 additional written submission. I will now give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents on this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, again, to facilitate your deliberations on this item 10, the Executive Secretary has prepared and made available document CBD/SBI/3/12 on the review of the effectiveness of processes under the Convention and its protocols. This document contains, in Section 3, suggested elements of recommendation for your consideration. The suggested elements of recommendation have 2 parts. The first set of recommendation refers to experience with concurrent meetings, while the second set of elements are on experience with virtual meetings that we have observed as of the end of August last year when the document was finalized. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I will now open the floor for interventions on agenda item 10, review of the effectiveness of the processes under the Convention and its protocols. I will open the floor for interventions, starting with regional groups, followed by parties, other governments, and observers. And I encourage you to keep your statements short and concise. Again, before I open the floor for interventions, due to the limited time we have, I would ask those parties and observers that delivered a statement on this item at the informal session to take the floor only in the event that you wish to add something to your previous intervention. In developing the CRP, all the comments and suggestions made in your statements, whether in March or today, will be considered carefully. So I will start with the interventions from regions, and from the African region, I see Egypt. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. So this agenda item 10 on review of effectiveness of the process under the Convention on its protocol is the same statement that we have already provided during the informal sessions in March. So we don't want to add any more because it is very clear and we support all the recommendations and appreciate all of the efforts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I see if there are any more requests from regions. Yes, Secretariat.
May I just note the European Union's comment in the chat for your attention and that of the participants. On item 10, the EU and its member states refer to the statement in the informal session that they have uploaded and proposed amendments on the SBI webpage. Thank you.
Yes, and I see if Peru, are you speaking on behalf of GURAC?
Señora Presidenta.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Señora Presidenta, el Perú considera...
Madam Chair, Peru considers that having concurrent meetings of the governing bodies of the Convention and the Nagoya and Cartagena Protocol actually help with synergies and coordination. However, multiplicity of meetings could mean that we may not have the necessary time to cover all of this with the national focal points. When it comes to virtual meetings, given the practical difficulties related to the pandemic, we think that we have to guarantee transparency and participation of 3 delegates as a minimum as speakers. And we also think that it's of crucial importance to highlight reducing the carbon footprint because of virtual meetings. However, as we have reduced time for debates in the virtual sessions, and it does have an impact on the flow of debates compared to in-person meetings, and there's also connection problems and limited access to internet for certain countries. When it comes to the elements that have been proposed for the recommendations, our delegation considers that it is appropriate to hold concurrent meetings of the Conference of the Parties of the Convention and also in the MOP for the protocols, so that we can have guarantee of the full and effective participation of the representatives of the parties that are developing countries, and in particular least developed countries, small island developing states, and amongst others those that have economies in transition. And we also have to have transparent and participatory processes for negotiations in virtual meetings and increase our capacity and make available the technical and technological assistance so that representatives can participate in the meetings in an efficient way. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peru. And I understand that it was a statement on behalf of Peru. Sorry, it was my misunderstanding. So, colleagues, I will now open the floor for interventions by parties. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the startup bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. So I will give the floor to Argentina, followed by UK. Argentina, you have the floor.
Señora Presidenta, Argentina
Madam Chair, Argentina expresses its deep concern because of the severe limitation on participation and transparency which is generated because of the virtual meetings that we are holding, in line with what has been mentioned by many developing countries, indigenous peoples, stakeholder groups and civil society. We recognise the need to make progress in our discussions, but the methodology that has been chosen brings serious threats in terms of the trust that's been built between parties and observers during almost 3 decades of work together in CBD, and it also increases asymmetries between developing countries and developed countries. In this respect, we will put in suggested modifications to the COP decision in order to express this concern related to the persistency of problems of connectivity and different time zones. At the same time, we also suggest that we endorse what has been agreed in terms of the current formal sessions, namely that virtual meetings are responding to exceptional circumstances related to the pandemic and should not set a precedent for the organisation of similar meetings in the future. Additionally, the recommendation should call on parties to remain flexible and participate in virtual meetings while the pandemic prevents us from having in-person events and not in an indeterminate way. Finally, we request that the proposed procedures to be developed by the Secretariat should be submitted to the consideration of the parties, should be adjusted to situations caused by extraordinary circumstances without presuming that this is the new normal. Dear delegates, we have to avoid getting used to a form of work that does not guarantee full, effective and equitable participation of all parties and observers in formal proceedings. We reiterate our will to continue participating in this discussion with the objective of finding solutions that will not increase asymmetries between developing countries and developed countries. The challenge to halt the loss of biodiversity means that we have to have work modalities that are inclusive, that do not leave anyone behind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. I will now give the floor to UK. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The comments made by the UK at the informal session still apply, and we will not repeat those here. We support the elements of the draft recommendation, but would like to make some observations in relation to virtual meetings, and in particular, virtual negotiations. The UK remains committed to agreeing an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework at COP15. We believe that the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change mean that there is no time for delay. COP must take place in October. We recognise, therefore, the important role of virtual sessions in making progress and the tremendous efforts being made by the Secretariat, the co-chairs, and all delegates in progressing discussions in these challenging times. We would like to make 4 suggestions of ways to address some of the challenges experienced through virtual sessions, but these should be taken in the context of finding shared solutions to shared problems. First, we suggest rotating meeting times through the time zones to share the burden of late nights and early mornings more equitably. Secondly, enabling the submission of written comments in advance to facilitate quicker identification of areas where it will be helpful to focus discussions during the meeting. Thirdly, making use of online technologies, such as online forums or questionnaires, to progress discussions. And finally, limiting the meetings to the allotted time, unless there are exceptional circumstances under which an extension is required. We are working tirelessly to deliver a safe, successful UNFCCC COP26 in Glasgow this November, and want to be able to hold this in person. As hosts, we recognise how urgently the world must come together to agree action to tackle climate change. We are working closely with our public health officials, the Scottish Government, all our partners and the UNFCCC, exploring how we can have an in-person event to enable relevant delegates to participate on an equal footing, while also using technology to make the summit as inclusive as possible. Working closely with all partners, we're exploring what different scenarios might mean for the summit and how we plan for that in light of the pandemic. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UK. I will now give the floor to Brazil. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again. Brazil attaches great importance to Agenda Item 10 as a way to assess the effectiveness of the processes under the Convention and its protocols, allowing further improvement in the functioning of the meetings of the parties. Hence, we take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for preparing document SBI-3/12. However, Brazil is concerned with some findings of the review, particularly with regard to the representation of developing countries' parties in fair, equitable terms, both in concurrent meetings and in virtual meetings. Concerning the concurrent meetings of the Conference of the Parties and of the COP serving as the MOP to Cartagena Protocol and the Nagoya Protocol, the review should stress three essential elements: the need to ensure the appropriate representation of developing countries, the need to give sufficient time to the three instruments in negotiation sessions, and the need to streamline the agendas for the meetings as much as possible to reduce the need for contact groups. From our point of view, these conclusions must be reflected in the recommendation to be adopted by SBI. Nevertheless, we realize, not without concern, that they are not present in Section A of the suggested recommendations under discussion. Furthermore, regarding virtual meetings, Brazil understands that virtual meetings can only be convened under exceptional circumstances and must not set a precedent for future negotiations. We must admit that virtual meetings place a significant burden on the human resources of developing country parties and undermine their effective participation. In this regard, the recommendations must emphasize the need for enhanced transparency, inclusivity, and fairness when convening those meetings, in order to ensure the adequate participation of parties, in particular developing countries. Potential environmental and financial benefits must not take precedence over the overarching principles that guide the multilateral process. We will submit written comments in this regard with specific text proposals. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. And I will now give the floor to Malaysia. You have the floor.
Hear me, Chair? Distinguished delegates, Malaysia acknowledges that it's not ideal for decision-making meetings like the Substar and SBI to be held virtually. However, given the situation that we are in due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we understand that this is the best way forward for the CBD process to continue. In this regard, we would like to commend the efforts of the CBD Secretariat. However, many parties, including Malaysia, face significant challenges. Hence, Malaysia would like to suggest that further work of the CBD, especially for decision-making bodies, to be conducted through a face-to-face or hybrid mechanism. We strongly urge that COP15 be held physically when the COVID-19 pandemic improves with strict adherence to protocols. As for virtual sessions, Malaysia is in agreement with the 3-hour non-parallel format with sufficient breaks currently carried out. However, Malaysia calls for more equitable scheduling of all virtual sessions of the CBD, considering the significant impact of the late night/early morning meetings towards fellow colleagues in the Asia Pacific. Learning from the late scheduling of Substar 24 and SBI-3, these meetings put us at a disadvantage in negotiations as it contradicts with our natural human sleep cycles. We suggest the scheduling to be more evenly distributed across the time zones in the future, as an equitable implementation of the CBD requires equitable approach to the parties implementing the CBD. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. And I see no more requests from parties. So we'll now move to interventions from other governments. Is there any requests from other governments? No, I see none. I would now like to open the floor for interventions from organizations, beginning with major group of stakeholders. I would now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of the major stakeholder groups. Each statement should not exceed 5 minutes. So if I have on my list, on behalf of IPLCs, IIFB, are you speaking on behalf? No raised hand. Is there any who will speak on behalf of major stakeholder groups? Could you please raise your hand? Maybe Secretariat, you can help me. I have some names in my list here, but there are no raised hand.
As far as we know, all three were supposed to speak on this agenda item on behalf of IPLCs, on behalf of women's organizations, and on behalf of youth. Maybe if not, then we could move on.
Okay. Yes, since I don't see any raised hand, I will continue. And I will now open the floor for interventions from other observers. And you have 2 minutes for your statements. And I see NGO Third World Network. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor again. If our objective is to ensure transparency and equitable and effective participation in current and future negotiations, particularly with respect to developing country parties and civil society, the following issues in relation to virtual meetings need to be addressed urgently. Decision-making on important procedural matters, including on the adoption of final documents, should be decided democratically by all parties. There should be clearly agreed parameters, principles, and/or safeguards. The issue of digital security and privacy is very important, particularly with respect to regional group consultations. In the interest of transparency, information on these arrangements should be made available. The efforts made so far are appreciated, but they are still inadequate to address the structural, technical, and connectivity issues. There are already many disadvantages faced by developing country parties and civil society in virtual negotiations. And there are vast financial savings from virtual as compared to face-to-face sessions. At a minimum, and as an issue of equity, some of the financial savings should be made available to developing country parties and accredited CSOs for hardware and software upgrades, for accessing the highest bandwidth available, and to access the virtual sessions from UN country offices. While it may be standard procedure for face-to-face meetings that contact groups and other informal groups work only in English, this is inequitable for the majority non-English speaking world. At a minimum, the financial savings from virtual sessions should be used for interpretation of contact and other informal groups and translation of non-papers into all UN languages. These issues must be addressed now and not left as SBI-4 or COP16. We remain very concerned that OWEC3 may be convened virtually. We consider that negotiation and adoption of substantive policy outcomes should be postponed until formal in-person negotiations can once again take place to ensure equitable and balanced process and outcomes. The postponed negotiations, however, must not be used as an excuse to avoid existing CBD obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, Third World Network. And I see no more requests for the floor. Thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. And we have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on Agenda Item 10 on review of effectiveness of the processes under the Convention and its protocols. And I will now prepare a conference room paper with the help of a secretariat to reflect the views we heard on the draft recommendations. In keeping with our schedule of meetings, we'll take up agenda item 10 to review the CRP in the coming days. Please refer to the timeline in the annex to the scenario note for this session, as well as the Secretariat's website. And we will now turn to the next agenda item, and that is agenda item 3 on review of progress in implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020, review and approval of CRP. But before we do that, I will just need 2 minutes break to consult with the Secretariat. So if you just don't log off, but I just will ask for 2 minutes break. Thank you. Colleagues, welcome back. I now invite delegates to consider Agenda Item 3 on review of progress in the implementation of a convention and the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 to 2020. As you will recall, we considered this issue in our plenary session of 16th May. Based on the interventions in plenary and during the informal meeting of SBI in March, I, with the support of the Secretariat, have prepared a conference rooms paper for our consideration. However, before we begin considering this CRP, we will discuss during this meeting of SBI which stem from the unique situation in which we find ourselves. First, as agreed with the Bureau, this session of SBI will only agree on CRPs. The adoption of L documents will take place at a later session of SBI. The date of this later session still needs to be determined by the Bureau. Given this, any request to the Executive Secretary for intersessional work between now and COP15 would need to be reflected in the report of this meeting, rather than as requests from SBI in the CRPs. Similarly, any invitations or requests related to the post-2020 working group would also need to be reflected in the report of this meeting as per the statement made by the rapporteur on 15 May. Let me remind you, however, that we should avoid such work as far as possible, given that the limited time before the working group and the COP. So with those remarks, I now propose that we begin our discussion with CRP 2 on review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. And I would like to go through this document paragraph by paragraph. I am sure that you all have had time to go through it. It has been uploaded, so Secretariat, we can start to go through it paragraph by, okay? So I will start to go through the first paragraph, the preamble text. Can we approve the first preamble text? Starting with subsidiary body of implementation recommends. I see no objection. That subparagraph is approved. And then we continue with the next subpara that starts with the calling paragraph 3 of decision 10.2. Can we approve that? No? I see requests for the floor from Portugal and Canada. Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak on behalf of the European Union and Member States. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the Chair and the Secretary for the relevant work and their efforts to bring all views together. Also, many thanks for the draft recommendations submitted by the Chair on this agenda item. We indeed very much appreciate the text proposed, and we consider it a very good basis to further work. On that basis, I would like to propose some amendments on CRP And about the introduction paragraphs, replacing the first and second paragraph for recalling decision 10/2. As this whole agenda item is about the implementation of strategic plan as a whole, it is most appropriate to refer to the rule of the original decision 10/2 instead of individual paragraph. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I can take also, I have a comment from Canada as well. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We were also going to make a very similar point to that just raised by Portugal regarding the second and third preambular paragraph. As with Portugal, we believe it would be more appropriate to simply recall the whole of decision 10/2 on the strategic plan for biodiversity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, as I understand, the request from the EU and Canada is to replace the second and third paragraph with just the text recording decision 10/2. Is there any objections? I see Argentina and Brazil. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We understand what has been suggested by Canada and the European Union, but in our opinion, these two paragraphs contain elements that are very important to give context on the results as regards implementation of the strategic plan, so we would like to retain them. And we suggest the European Union and Canada, which other parts of 10.2 that would need to be included, because these are important aspects for us.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to support the comment just made by Argentina. We do find it important to keep those two preamble paragraphs, given that the specific paragraphs addressed in Decision 10/2 address specific challenges for the implementation of the Convention, in particular in developing countries. So it is pretty important to keep those referenced as a guide to how we can address those challenges in implementation for the post-2020 GBF. So we'd rather keep those two preamble paragraphs. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. And I give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're of the same view as the European Union and Canada, that we'd like to keep it short. But in the event that that's not acceptable, we would like to avoid really the cherry picking we have on the second preambular paragraph, where we only have some elements of the para. So if that were to remain, we would want to keep the whole text, because this is just elements of the paragraph. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So it could be maybe a solution to start by saying that we recalls the whole decision 10/2, but then continue in particular, and then add the text in that is now in para 2 and 3. Any objections of that proposal? No objections? So we will amend that paragraph accordingly. It's approved. Oh, so sorry, Portugal, you have the floor.
No. Thank Madam Chair. So we support Norway. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, I understood the Norwegian that they would like to have some text added to para 3, so that we're not only subpara 10 would be. Is that correct? Maybe Norway could you maybe repeat what you would like to add to subpara 3? Yes, please, Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you. I don't have the text in front of me right now, but it's on the second preambular. The sentence starts with recalling paragraph 3 of decision 10.2, and then only parts of that decision is reiterated in the text. So what our suggestion was to put the whole text as it is referenced in that decision. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't read it up. I think it's quite a few paras, actually. Thanks.
Okay. So if I rephrase my proposal then, if we start by recalling the whole decision 10/2, and then continue with in particular, and then I understood that Norway would like to have the full text of paragraph 3 of decision 10/2. If we make that decision, could then this solution be acceptable? No any objections to that? Portugal, you have the floor, and then Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clarifying our previous position on this, we believe we should not have in particular. So we believe that we should mention the whole decision. If we aren't able to agree on this, we propose to bracket it, to have this paras bracket until have further conclusion on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So firstly, we can agree with Portugal's previous intervention. In particular, what we were suggesting is that we have a short paragraph recalling Decision 10/2 on the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity. And we could also recall Section 5 of its annex on implementation, monitoring, review, and evaluation. That would be our preference. If there is a preference, an overall preference to include specific mentions of paragraphs, we feel it will become very bulky in the preambular, and for this reason we suggested the shorter version. For example, we can also see a relevance of paragraphs 14, 15, and 17 of decision 10/2 being relevant to reference again. So our preference remains to focus just on recalling the whole of the decision. And perhaps, if indeed there's reference to particular paragraphs within the decision 10/2, perhaps they could be named without including the specific or partial languages Norway referenced, as we would agree with Norway that if we are going to reference a paragraph from the previous decision, it should be referenced in its entirety. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. And I give the floor to Argentina. And then I will do a proposal. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, without a doubt, that could be a positive way of continuing with your proposal by referring the whole of the decision first, and then saying in particular, and then the text to be decided by the parties. To come back to what Norway has said, that could work, but we need to be able to see the text proposed by Norway specifically so that we can give our final opinion on our agreement or not to this approach put forward by Norway. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. I was wondering if we start by recalling the whole decision as proposed, decision 10/2, if instead of particular use including, and then continue as now in the CRP, would that be acceptable? Not using particular, instead using including. Start with the reference to the whole decision, and then continue including. And then we have a second and third para as now. Any objections to that? Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, again. Regarding your proposal, we believe including is appropriate, but we would like to have then the other relevant paragraphs being mentioned. As also stated by Canada, so we believe that we don't have to give any particular elements. We should instead give the whole picture that is given by the decision. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. As I understand, we start by recalling the whole decision, so everything is included there. But it was also some parties felt they really wanted to mention specific parts of a decision, and some others have opposed that. But the whole decision 10 is referred to. Okay, maybe we have to keep the text in brackets so far. Okay, Canada, you have the floor, or maybe you can help me with the solution.
Thank you, Chair. And I was hoping indeed that you could help me, as I'm not entirely sure what your proposal is. If I understood correctly, and please do clarify for me, your proposal is for us to recall decision 10/2 on the strategic plan, including, and then if I understand correctly, paragraph 3, paragraph 10, we would suggest also recall including paragraphs 14, 15, and 17. But I am pardon me, but I'm unclear is if your suggestion is to simply recall paragraph 10, or if you should language or the repetition of the exact language in both paragraphs of decision 10/2. So I appreciate some clarification on that.
Yes, of course. I try to be clear. My proposal to start as proposed by the opinion and you start with the text having a para saying recalling decision 10/2, including, and keep the text as now this year that is now para 3 and 4. And the reason was that some parties had very strong feelings they want to keep that specific text, but since the whole the change was saying including, not in particular. But I understood if could be maybe. I hope that is clear now. Is it clear for Canada?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is clear. In that regard, however, Canada still has concerns with including such significant amount of text. If to mention paragraphs, we prefer just mentioning the number, and so we continue to prefer simply recalling the strategic plan for biodiversity without the mention of specific text. So perhaps your proposal to retain the remaining language in brackets might be a way forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think that if nobody objects to have a text saying recalling decision 10/2, including South Africa. Maybe you have a solution?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm bringing more problems, Madam Chair. When I look at the text in the first and the second preambular paragraphs, I would support the colleagues from Argentina and Brazil in saying we need to specify what paragraph, because the two preambular paragraphs are quoting specific paragraphs to highlight different things. For instance, in the second preambular paragraph, it is a different highlight from the first one. So the reason for quoting the first paragraph in the first preambular paragraph is for a different purpose. Now, if we say we are recalling the whole of decision 10/2, then we will be making the other preambular paragraphs redundant, and hence they are very important to us. We want them to be emphasized and highlighted. But if we lump the whole decision in one preambular paragraph, then some of the aspects we would like to see being highlighted are going to diminish because the second preambular paragraph will be swallowed by the first one. That's how I see it. If we say we recall decision 10/2 as a whole, and then or we put all of the paragraphs in one preambular paragraph, then it kills the other idea in the following preambular paragraph. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. And colleagues, I've hoped that we could solve this para, but unfortunately time is running out. It's already past 10 now, so I need to adjourn the meeting for today. But please, we'll meet together. We'll meet tomorrow at 7 a.m. Montreal time and continue this discussion. And please, parties, I would like to ask you to come back ready to show some flexibility and approve text so we can make progress tomorrow morning. But I adjourn the meeting today. Thank you very much for all work and all views so far. See you again tomorrow. The meeting is adjourned.